This is that video for Chapter 2, The Value of Having Fun. Most of this information I'm getting is going to be straight from the book. After reading this chapter, it primarily focuses on leisure and how we have fun experiencing our leisure. The book claims we go beyond the definition of leisure explored in the previous chapter and focus on the variety of ways it is of value to us. And I'll be covering terms involving freedom, pleasure, happiness, play, humor, relaxation, ritual, and commitment. Let me start off reading about freedom. Foremost, leisure makes us feel free. We are having fun when we choose what we're doing. In fact, scholars suggest leisure cannot exist at all when our perception of freedom is curtailed. That is something I completely agree with. Leisure primarily is something we choose, rather if it's work or school or play, any type of recreation. We chose to do it, and we get to claim that it's our leisure. With that, the first definition we run into is ideal pure leisure, which is leisure experiences or expressions that are freely chosen for intrinsic reasons. And that's on page 28. It says the pure leisure state of mind suggests two different understandings of freedom. First, leisure is temporary freedom from the necessary routine of life. That is, leisure frees us from obligations and provides a relief from work, such as when we take a vacation. That first description of the pure leisure state of mind has some type of connotation that claims that you have to work to earn the freedom of that leisure, while the second characteristic involves actually having the freedom to do what you choose to do based on possessing personal qualities, having the means, and receiving permission. For example, once you're retired, you not only have the time to go on a vacation, but there's no more obligation for you to return, and you didn't need to ask for time off from work because the work doesn't exist. But considering you are already retiring, you have the means to do really whatever you want. During that last definition about pure leisure, it talked about intrinsic reasons. Now on page 30, it moves on to discussing intrinsic meaning, which is doing something for its own reason. I've always been taught it's like from the inside. For example, it talks about cross-country skiers. They often claim about sensations of peacefulness while gliding along the snow. Now, I've never cross-country skied, but I've gained that peacefulness doing other things, like working around the house. I enjoy it, like cutting the yard even. And that was from the inside, a feeling from the inside. Of course, the opposite of intrinsic meaning is extrinsic meaning. And the definition for that you can find on page 31. Doing something for another reason, such as for status or reward. I think it gives a good example about signing up for group exercise class to lose weight. Before, we talked about cross-country skiers and the peacefulness they have, while with an extrinsic meaning, people that are involved in group exercise, they don't do it to experience the exhilaration of moving their bodies, sweating, jumping around, or even trying to fit within that schedule to meet for those classes. They're actually working to lose weight, to look good, or just to have better health. We'll move on from freedom to happiness. So another benefit often available to us from our leisure is happiness, also known as subjective well-being, high morale, life satisfaction, and positive life attitude. Happiness generally is an indicator of the overall quality of our inner experience that typically comes from living well. To really try to focus on, what type of leisure brings us what kind of happiness, the book goes into discussing some historical, philosophical, or theoretical views from Aristotle and so forth. I'm not going to get into that. If you want to read it, you can. It's on page 32. And there's a definition there, which I'm not going to use for the exam or for the quiz, so you can just skip through that. But on page 33, it says here, the most vital link between leisure and happiness is the most likely via the concept of leisure satisfaction. The definition of leisure satisfaction is gratification and contentment with one's leisure experiences and opportunity. Several studies have found, for example, that experiencing leisure with an optimistic outlook, meaningful focus and commitment, and a belief in being capable in the leisure event determines happiness. I will agree with that. I really believe there's different definitions and reasons we gain happiness from our leisure, but those that were listed, that I listed just now, those are definitely some I would consider. However, half the time I'm just happy I'm not working or doing something that I felt was uncomfortable. So basically, it doesn't take much to make me happy when in my leisure. And I get that, just playing video games or playing with my kids or something. That's all I need. Now, from happiness, we move on to pleasure. And in almost all characterizations of leisure, pleasure is included, like listening to music or eating a handful of popcorn or even petting a dog. Those are forms of pleasure and all provide some enjoyment. They've come up with a definition called sensory pleasure, which is often found in activities such as eating, listening to music, and playing sports. The definition is on page 34, and it says pleasure from direct stimulation of the senses. Once again, the answers within the definition. Anyway, these expressions are pleasurable because they directly stimulate our senses. Now, as you've noticed in this book, they have alternative views on it, and the next one is expressive pleasure, which is pleasure from creativity. And it says here, as a result of our experience, something is produced, and this gives us pleasure. To distinguish, listening to rap music may trigger sensory pleasure, whereas creating a rap song more likely offers expressive pleasure. And then the final one is called intellectual pleasure, which is pleasure from thinking, and that's on page 35. These might include fantasizing, daydreaming, solving puzzles, or even studying. And so we move on from pleasure to play. And when you hear that term, you kind of relate to sports, playing sports or some type of athletic event. Then, of course, you actually have when you play like kids, jumping around, just all of a sudden instant playing. And then, of course, they've named shows like opera shows, like plays. Let's go to the play and watch them act. I was always surprised that the word play is even attached to our VCRs or DVDs or our MP3 players with that that directional, which we all know stands for play, that triangle directional shape, and it's just the universal thought of what play is, and it's very unlikely to find somebody who doesn't understand what play is. So we move on from play to humor, and that's something I try to convey to the class. That's part of my personality, is try to be funny and witty during our lectures, just to keep you entertained and interested in what we're discussing. But it's also one of the sections here. Humor is a benefit of leisure, and I agree. Or even being involved in humor, like going to certain stand-up routines, or telling jokes with your friends, or hanging out with your friends and joking around. It's all in good humor. And one thing it lists right here, which is, I think it's true, humor can erupt anywhere and any time. I really believe that. When I was in the service in the Marine Corps, we were always doing serious work, whether working with explosives or firing certain weapons. But even of such a serious nature, we found ways to have fun and be humorous about the situation, all regarding our safety. And if you even watch certain movies, there's those key phrases right in the middle of some action, some serious action. I discussed this, how some movies were just watching them kill each other, but they able to get a punchline in there to just wrap it all up in a funny manner. So we move on from humor to relaxation. I'm not going to get too much into that, because that is leisure for a lot of individuals, just some peace and quietness, and they relax. And then we move on from relaxation to ritual. Now, ritual is any customarily repeated acts, and I think they give a good example of certain holidays we celebrate, especially Thanksgiving. There's the ritual right there. Get that turkey out and the side dishes. Oh, it's so good. Well, that's a ritual we all practice, and it is one of our leisures. I enjoy it, and it does provide, to me, relaxation, happiness, pleasure. And if you keep reading down on page 42, it talks about site sacralization, and the definition of that is a tourist destination is considered sacred. Now, in class, I talked about the Wailing Wall there in Israel. They use the Mona Lisa as an example in the book. When people go see this piece of art, they're very respectful. So we go from ritual to something else which is similar to ritual, is commitment. Now, commitment, of course, is like the obligation to do something, especially when people are relying on you or you have that responsibility. But some of the commitment might be considered serious leisure, and that's on page 43. The definition of that is the substantial and systematic pursuit of a pastime. Now, you have to be committed for serious leisure. I think I am with my apps. I talked about my game apps. And you have to play every day to maintain a certain status. So you have to be committed to give time to it. And it does take time away from my family or doing some chores. But I enjoy doing it, and I'm committed. I'm sure each and one of you have some type of commitment toward a leisure activity. And then finally, it goes on to the section of risk. And we talked about rock climbing a little bit in class, and they mentioned bungee jumping and surfing, and that type of leisure there provides a sense of happiness and pleasure for some individuals. Not for me, but it is very risky. Well, just want to let everybody know, anything that was going to be on the quiz or the exam, I've told you what page it's going to be on. It's primarily the definitions, so make sure to take the quiz that I'm going to post there on Blackboard, and once you've completed it, just continue to review the quizzes for the exam Monday.